So today's daf is daf Samach Vav, and we'll start from the top of the Yomud. Let's just reiterate what we saw in the Mishnah, and that's an introduction to our sugya. There's two categories of taroves. When Isur gets mixed up into heter, there's what's called min b'mino, and that's hafilu be'elef lo batel, and it's also b'mashahu. And then there's min b'she'eno mino, which is batel b'nosein tam, which as a general rule, there are always exceptions, is a ratio between 1 and 60. And now we have a discussion between Rava and Abaye about how do we determine whether it's called min b'mino or min b'she'eno mino. So we start with Abaye. Chamra atika, when we have old wine, be'inve, and this wine, let's say, is yain nesach, and it got mixed up with grapes, and the grapes are heter, they're mutter, is divrei hakol b'nosein tam. Everyone agrees that in this case will determine whether or not the nesach yayin will prohibit the grapes based on a ratio of 1 to 60, meaning min b'she'eno mino. That's called nosein tam. And the reason for this is because apparently when it's brand new wine, it's got its own status. We'll see what that means as we go along. And since it has its own status, it's considered like min b'she'eno mino. Chamra chadata, however, when we talk about brand new wine, be'inve, got mixed up with grapes. Now, brand new wine has no taste of wine yet. All it tastes like is basically the juice of grapes. So when it gets mixed up with grapes, Abaye Amar b'mashu, Abaye says this is a case of min b'mino. Because if we categorize the ta'am, then the ta'am of this new wine is equal to the ta'am of the grapes. And that makes it min b'mino, which is a big chumrah, because then it's asur b'mashu, there's no bittul at all. Now, why there's no bittul in a case of min b'mino is very, very esoteric. I mean, you could say because since they're both the same min, you can't be mavatel one, you can't differentiate one from the other. But I think it's much more profound than that. I think, as we'll see, Rava has a unique shita in min b'mino. It probably has to do with the fact that bittul requires a conflict, a head-on collision, where two things are mutually exclusive. But once they all have the same tam, they sort of like blend together, and you can't have one being mevatel the other. But comes along Rava Amar b'nosein tam. Rava says that apparently even chamra chadata has its own tam, which is very strange. And the Gemara is not going to be happy with that, and is going to have to come up with a whole new perspective on the sheet of Rava, which is called Al Zlinan Basa Shma. We'll explain as we go along. But first, let's go through Abaye Omar b'mashuhu Basa Taima Zlinan. It all depends upon tam. And when it comes to new wine, as we said before, it hasn't yet developed a tam of yayin, so it has the old tam of the grapes, and therefore, idi ve'idi chad taimahu, both the grapes and the new wine have the same taste. And therefore, havile min b'mino. If they both have the same tam, that's min b'mino, and min b'mino is also b'mashu. Rav Amar b'nosein tam. Rava says, if new wine, yayin nesach, gets mixed up with grapes, then we're going to apply the principle of min b'she'eno mino, which again, as we said before, is very strange. How could you say it's min b'she'eno mino? It's new wine. New wine doesn't have a mature taste. It hasn't matured in its taste. It's got the same old taste as grape juice. And the answer is, and this is what I call like a bomb. The Gemara is dropping a bomb here. Basar shma is lina. If you want to know whether you have min b'mino or min b'she'eno mino, Rav has a whole different criterion. It doesn't depend upon tam. You could have two things that have the identical tam and it's min b'she'eno mino. You could have two things that have different tam and it's still min b'mino. What will determine whether it's min b'mino, min b'she'eno mino? Says Rava Hai Basar Shma Azlina. It all depends upon how we call it. What name does it have? If it emerges with its own name, then it's a new min, and we apply the principle of min b'she'eno mino is batel b'tam, even though it's new wine. And if it's new wine, it has the taste of grapes. Hai shmolachud v'hai shmolachud. Grapes has a name and wine has a name. And even though it's brand new wine, it might still be carrying the taste of the grapes, but it has a new shem. And two things that have the same tam but different shemos, they're called by different names, according to Rava, are min b'she'eno mino. Now, when you think about it, the final determining factor, according to Rava, as to whether the taruvus is also a mutter, depends upon the sinus tam. But wait a second, we just said that chamra chadati, new wine, has the same identical tam as the juice of the grapes. So you're not going to be able to tell me which tam. Normally we have something called te'imas kfela. Are you familiar with that, Ira? Te'imas kfela means that if milk falls into meat, and I don't know if the milk gave a taste of milk into the meat, give it to a kfela. I give it to a chef. And it could be even a non-Jewish chef. Actually, it has to be a non-Jewish chef, right? But here in this case of Nesinas Tam, no chef in the world will be able to differentiate between the taste of the wine that fell in and the taste of the grapes upon which the wine fell, because the new wine has the same taste as grapes. So min b'she'eno mino b'nosein tam, you can't take the Gemara literally at face value b'nosein tam, because nosein tam means did it give off a taste? Well, it's the same taste anyway. So you're going to have to say that nosein tam here in this context means 1 against 60. So again, just to summarize, Abai says everything depends upon tam, and therefore, if it's chamra chadati, if it's new wine, then it's min b'mino, and it's also b'mashu. Rava, on the other hand, says it all depends upon shma, and if it has a brand new shma, and wine is not the same as grapes, and therefore it's min b'she'eno mino, and it's b'nosein tam. Tanan, we learned in that Mishnah, and now the Gemara is going to raise an objection against Abaye. Right, we have a case where wine, where it's osur, t'ayinesa falls on grapes, and it depends what kind of grapes you have, and if there are cracks in the grapes, and crevices, and so forth and so on. Because salka daituch, at the point of this challenge to Abaye, we think that chamra chadata be'invi, that the Mishnah is talking about a mixture of brand new wine together with grapes. The new wine is yayin nesech, and my lab b'nosein tam. Don't we assume that the Mishnah is telling me that the way we determine whether or not the yayin nesech gave a tam, imparted a tam on these grapes, is b'nosein tam? Now, according to Abaye, there can't be b'nosein tam because we're talking about chamra chadati, brand new wine, and it has the identical taste as grapes. So Gemara says, wait a minute, you're assuming that the halacha in this case is b'nosein tam. How do you know that? The Mishnah doesn't explicitly mention nosein tam. Lo, b'mashu, what the Mishnah has in mind is that it's also b'mashu. And the reason why it's also b'mashu, again, according to Abaye, as we said over and over again, is because new grapes have the same identical tam as grapes, and therefore it's min b'mino, which is afilu be'elif lo potel, it's b'mashu. Gemara says, wait a minute. You know what? Sometimes when you read a Mishnah, you shouldn't just stop after you read the beginning of the Mishnah. You have to read the Mishnah in its entirety. Hamidik Tani Seifa, and if we learn the Seifa of this Mishnah very carefully, and what does it say? It says that Klal, Kol Shabanosa B'Nosein Tam Os, Shein B'Nosa Nosein Tam, Mutter. And the Mishnah differentiates, which is going to be the sugya for tomorrow, between Tam Lifgam and Tam Lishvach. What kind of Tam was imparted by the Isser in this Tarovis? Was it detrimental? That's called Lifgam. Or did it enhance the Tam, and that's called Lishvach? But you see that the whole discussion in the Mishnah revolves around Tam. Michlal de B'Nosein Tam Askinon. Whereas according to you, Abaye, in a case of Yayin Chadita and Anovim, the halacha would be that it's min b'mino, because Abaye insists that the tam of new wine is identical with the tam of grapes. Says the Gemara of Abaye, masnisim bechabra atika be'invi. We were assuming, and based on this premise, we attacked Abaye, that this Mishnah is dealing with chamra chadite, new wine. And therefore we came to the conclusion that it's min b'mino, according to Abaye, it should be also b'mashu. Why does it say b'nosei tam? The answer is that the Mishnah is not talking about chamra chadite, it's talking about chamra atike. And old wine has a different taste. Until it ages and ferments and so forth and so on, it still carries the same identical time as the grape juice. But once it gets to a certain stage, it develops its own time. And therefore, both according to Abaye, who holds Azlin and Basar Taima, and according to Rava, who holds Azlin and Basar Shma, everybody would agree that this is a case of Min B'Sheino Mino. And therefore it's b'nosei tam. Okay. Now, vinegar can be made from wine. That's called wine vinegar. Could even buy it in the stores today. And it has the status of yayin nesech if it was poured by an idolater. So what happens if wine vinegar, which again, as we said, is yayin nesech, gets mixed up with regular vinegar, which is called beer vinegar, made out of beer, made out of hops. So challah de chabra v'challah de shikra, we have now a mixture of two types of vinegar, wine vinegar and beer vinegar. V'chamira de chiti v'chamira de siori, we have two different types of breads. One bread is made of wheat and the other is made of barley. And they got mixed together. Now, I'm assuming that one of these two, barley or wheat, is truma. Abaye Omer b'nosei tam. Abaye says that whether or not this mixture is also depends upon nosei tam. Basar taima azlina. This is Abaye consistently maintaining that everything depends upon the tam. V'hai taima lechud. V'hai taima lechud. Wine vinegar has its own time compared to beer vinegar. Anybody who has a little sensitivity and experience will know how to differentiate. And therefore, Havile Mid B'Sheino Mina. According to Abaye, this combination of two types of vinegar is Mid B'Sheino Mino, because each one has a different time. Mid B'Sheino Mina, but no same time. Good. So Abaye now is a makil. He's lenient, and he allows us to apply the principle of no same time, meaning to apply the principle of bittul, because according to Abaye, as lenient basa taima, and these two categories of vinegar have different ta'amim, different flavors. Rav Amar b'mashu, basa shma is lenient. Rav is very consistent. He says basa shma, and therefore, what's going on over here? Vinegar is vinegar is vinegar. You can add an adjective and call this one wheat vinegar, call this one beer vinegar, call it what you want. But at the end of the day, it's called vinegar. And therefore, Rava turns to Abaye and he says, "What? Why? Who gives you the right to apply the principle of min b'shedo mino? This is min b'mino. They both have the same shame." Although Rava would have to agree that they have different timing. V'hai chala mikri v'hai chala mikri. V'hai chamira mikri v'hai chamira mikri. V'avile min b'mino chal min b'mino. Gamash. Vinegar equals vinegar. Omar Abaye, mina mina loktabasa time aslinon. What is the basis for my conclusion and formulation of the principle that in mixtures we go basatam? This not we learned in a Mishnah, and I believe this is a Mishnah in Trumas. Let's see if he points that out. No, it's an Orla, sorry. And it says Tavlin Shnai Ushlosha Shemos Vehem Min Echad. O min shalosha asurim umitztarfin. It says here in this Mishnah that if you have tavlin of Easter that fell into a pot, then we're mitzaref the two categories of tavlina. Yom Chizki commented on this Mishnah. Hacha b'mine mesika as linon. Hoil ureuyim lematik benes hakeder. Now let's see. We'll work backwards here. It says Abaye, if everything depends upon tam, is kulo chada tamahu. The seasons combine together, even though they're different species, to generate an Isser on the pot. And why do they combine together? Because as Lina Basa Taiba, they all have the same time. Kulach Adatabahu. Ela Amrit, according to Rava. Basa Shmaz Linon. Haishma Lechud v'Haishma Lechud. Why do we say it's also b'mashu? Asurim mitzarf. And by the way, if you have any doubts about whether or not we're talking about Shemos Mechulakim, take a look at the language of the Mishnah. Tavlin Shnayim Ushlosha Shemos. They have different Shemos. So Rava answers, Rava Amalecha. Amani Rabbi Meir he. This Mishnah is to be attributed to Rabbi Meir. This sign we went to the Brisa. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shu, Rabbi Meir. Minayin shekol isur shebator shemitztarfim ze im ze shenema lo sochal kol toeva kol shetiavta lecha tiavti lecha rei hu bichlal birbal tochal. So it sounds like, according to Rabbi Meir, it's an unbelievable chiddush here. All these surim have one common shem. It reminds me again, not to compare the two, like you have Avos and Toldos on Shabbos. The Toldos set up separate isurim. You know, there's Mashkes Roim, and then there's Orea, and so forth and so on. But in terms of the Isur, it's all one Isur, and that's called the Av Malach. Now we're saying, according to Rava, that if we invoke the sheet of Rabbi Meir holds that all Isur Shabbat Torah are part of one entity. They have a common denominator. They're all called by one name. And he derives it from the pasuk Kol Toeva. He calls it an umbrella prohibition. That's very nice. So again, according to Rav Aslina Basar Shmo, and now we're holding like Rabbi Meir that all Isurim have the same shame. And if these different seasonings have different shemos of Isur, but nevertheless, according to Rabbi Meir, it's all one shame. Okay. Now we go on in the Machlokas Rav and Abai. Again, Rava says it's Lina Basa Taima, and Rava says it's Lina Basa Shma. Chala lego chamra. So chamra is wine, and chala is vinegar. And the vinegar is asur, and the wine is mutter. Divrei hakol b'nosein tam. So what does that mean? Divrei hakol b'nosein tam. Even Rava would agree. I mean, Monofshach, I think no matter how you sauce the cake, either the vinegar and the wine have two different tastes, obviously, or alternatively, they have two different shemos. So no matter how you cut the cake, it's always going to come out either a Abaye or Rava to be Benosein Tam. But now the opposite. Chamra lego chala. The wine is yayin esech, and it fell into vinegar. Heter. So its Easter fell into heter. And now we said each one has a different tam. Is Abaye Omar. I'm sorry. Now, now we're introducing a whole nother branch of this sugya. And that is Reicha. Abaye holds Reicha Milsa, that the Torah considers the aroma of something, the smell, to be considered like the flavor, like the tam. And therefore, in this case, where wine fell into vinegar, the wine imparts a certain smell to the vinegar, but that smell apparently is very similar to the smell of vinegar. And therefore, Abaye Omer Mashu, it's min b'mina, Rav Omer b'nosein tam. Rava says that it all depends upon when there's tam in the tarovis. Did the wine generate tam in this tarovis? Abaye Omer b'mashahu, and here we're going to turn to Daf